Happy woo. There we go. Happy woo. Happy Tuesday. I'm Charlotte, and this is quarantine story time when we are taking our shelter in place time due to COVID-19 here in the US, are taking our time to read classic literature. Welcome back. It's great to see everyone tuning in. I do this weekdays at 3 p.m. and I have things are slowly starting to reopen in different parts of the country. And so I will actually have some few days of work coming up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pre-record either in the morning or in the night before the section for the day, and then be posted on my channel. So everyone can continue to tune in live at 3, and sometimes the stream will be live, and sometimes it'll just be a video. But if you go to my channel homepage, I'll make sure it's the main video that's posted. And just look for the next number. And because all the War and Peace reading will be in the War and Peace playlist for you to check out. So you can just, the next consecutive number. So, hope everyone had a great Monday. Where we left off yesterday was the Rostov family was going on a wolf hunt. My hair is crazy. Sorry about that. The Rostov family were going on a wolf hunt. They should be economizing because they're having serious problems with their accounts and may even have to start selling some of their estates. But nobody in the family seems to really have a good financial or business sense. The dad is a very wonderful, effusive man who has no idea about anything and just can't settle his mind to business. His son, Nikolai Rostov, the oldest son, also seems to have no head for business and would much rather just be with his regiment in the army. He's home, and he's, as much as he's done to taking everything to task, is to yell and verbally attack and even kick in the pants the family accountant. And that's basically everything that's happened. Natasha Rostov is engaged secretly to our man, Prince Andrei Bolkonsky, and their engagement is coming close to time to be married. He said he'd be back in around December, end of the year, and it is now the fall. So they're a few months away. We'll see what happens with them. And we haven't heard anything more about our man Pierre, though he had been resolving himself to study more of his Mason teaching and possibly be reconciled with his wife. Or, I mean, he was reconciled to his wife. I don't know if he's actually going to continue to, work on that relationship, because basically they live together, but they're, live two separate lives in a way, because they're really two very different people. So, yeah. That's basically where we are. So let's jump back into the hunt. They've gone hunting for wolves, which, I don't know, I found kind of horrifying, actually. Because because at least in America now, wolves are an endangered species. There's not enough of them around. So the idea that they're hunting a wolf mother and her cubs, I'm this doesn't sound like it's going to be good. So yeah, let's see what they get up to. So we're reading Volume 2, Part 4, starting in Section 5 today, and we'll read 5, 6, and 7. Nikolai Rostov, meanwhile, stood in his place waiting for the beast. From the way the chase approached or withdrew, from the giving tongue of the dogs, he knew, from the approaching withdrawing and rising voices of the kennelmen, he could sense what was happening in the island. He knew that there were growing, young, and seasoned old wolves. He knew that the hounds had broken up into 2 packs, that they were chasing somewhere, and that something had gone wrong. He expected the beast on his side every second. He made thousands of different conjectures about how and on which side the beast would come running, and how he would chase him down. Hope alternated with despair. Several times he addressed God with a plea that the wolf come out at him. He prayed with that passionate and guilty feeling with which people pray at moments of strong agitation arising from insignificant causes. What would it cost you, he said to God. Do it for me. I know you are great, and it's a sin to ask it of you, but for God's sake, make it so that the old wolf comes my way, and Corray, before my uncle's eyes, gets a death grip on his throat. 1,000 times during that half hour, Rostov cast intent strained and anxious glances around the edge of the woods, with 2 meager oaks above the aspen undergrowth, and the ravine with its eroded edge, and his uncle's hat barely showing from behind a bush to the right. No such luck is not to be, thought Rostov, and yet what would it cost? It's not to be. I'm always unlucky, in cards and war and everything. Austerlitz and Dolokhov vividly but fleetingly flashed into his imagination. If only once in my life I could chase down a seasoned wolf, I'd ask for nothing more, he thought, straining his hearing and sight and looking to the left and then to the right, and listening to the smallest nuances in the sounds of the chase. He again looked to the right and saw that something was running towards him across the empty field. No, it can't be, thought Rostov, sighing deeply, as a man sighs at the accomplishment of something he has long awaited. What was accomplished was his greatest happiness, and so simply, without noise, without splendor or portent. Rostov could not believe his eyes, and this doubt continued for more than a second. The wolf ran on and jumped heavily over a hole that lay in his path. He was an old beast, with a gray back and a well-stuffed reddish belly. He ran unhurriedly, obviously convinced that no one could see him. Rostov, holding his breath, glanced at the dogs. They were lying down or standing, not seeing the wolf and understanding nothing. Old Karay turned his head and, baring his yellow teeth, clacked them along his haunch, angrily searching for a flea. "Halloo!" Rostov said in a whisper, protruding his lips. The dogs, jingling the metal rings of their collars, jumped up and cocking their ears. Karay finished scratching his haunch and stood up, cocking his ears and slightly wagging his tail from which tufts of fur hung. Loose them or not, Nikolai was saying to himself, when all the while the wolf moved towards him, drawing away from the woods. Suddenly the wolf's entire physiognomy changed. He shuddered at the sight of human eyes, which he had probably never seen before, directed at him, and turned his head slightly towards the hunter and stopped. Go back or go on? It makes no difference, I'll go on, he seemed to say to himself, and started forward, not looking around now, as a soft, long, free, but resolute lope. "Halloo!" Nikolai shouted in a voice not his own, and of itself his good horse raced headlong down the hill, leaping over gullies to head off the wolf. And still more quickly, outstripping the horse, ran the dogs. Nikolai did not hear his own shouts, did not feel that he was galloping, did not see the dogs or the space over which he was galloping. He saw only the wolf, who, quickening his pace, loped down the hollow without changing direction. The first to turn up near the beast was the black-spotted, broad-haunched Milka, who began to close in on him. Closer, closer. There she was, right next to him, but the wolf barely gave her a sidelong glance, and instead of pushing on, as she always did, Milka, racing her tail, suddenly began breaking with her forelegs. "Halloo, shouted Nikolai. The red Luibim overtook Milka, precipitously threw himself at the wolf, and seizing him by the hindquarters, but in the same second became frightened and jumped over to the other side. The wolf crouched, clacking his teeth, got up again, and loped on, accomplished a 2 yards distance by all the dogs, who would not go nearer to him. He'll get away. No, it's impossible, Nikolai thought, continuing to shout in a hoarse voice. "Karay! Halloo!" he shouted, his eyes seeking the old dog, his only hope. Karay, with all his aged strength, stretched out as much as he could, looking at the wolf, galloped heavily alongside the beast, trying to head him off. But it was clear from the speed of the wolf and the slowness of the dog that Karay's calculation was wrong. Not far ahead of him now, Nikolai saw the woods, on reaching which the wolf would certainly get away. Ahead of them, dogs appeared, and a hunter galloping almost straight towards them. There was still hope. A young, lanky bridle dog, unknown to Nikolai, brindle dog, unknown to Nikolai, from another pack, flew swiftly at the wolf from the front and nearly bowled him over. The wolf got up more quickly than might have been expected of him, rushed at the brindle dog, snapped his teeth, and bloodied the dog. Its side ripped open, let out a piercing squeal, burying its head in the ground. "Karyushka, old boy," wept Nikolai. Thanks to the delay, the old dog, his matted fur hanging from his haunches, headed off the wolf and was now within 5 paces of him. The wolf, as if sensing the danger, gave Karai a sidelong glance, tucked his tail still further between his legs, and increased his pace. But here, Nikolai only saw that something happened with Karai. He was instantly on top of the wolf and rolled head over heels with him into a ditch in front of them. That moment, when Nikolai saw the dog swarming over the wolf in the ditch, saw under them the wolf's gray fur, his outstretched hind leg, and his frightened and gasping head with its ears laid back. Karay had him by the throat. The moment when Nikolai saw that was the happiest moment of his life. He had already taken hold of the pommel so as to dismount and stab the wolf when the beast's head suddenly thrust itself out from the mass of dogs. Then his front legs stood up on the edge of the ditch. The wolf clacked his teeth. Karay no longer had him by the throat and leaped out of the ditch with his hind legs and, tucking his tail, moved off, drawing away from the dogs again. Karay, his fur bristling, probably bruised or wounded, had difficulty climbing out of the ditch. "My God, why?" Nikolai cried in despair. The uncle's hunter rode across the wolf's path from the other side, and his dog again stopped the beast. He was again surrounded. Nikolai, his groom, the hunter, and the uncle all rode round and round the beast, hallooing, shouting, preparing to dismount at any moment, when the wolf sat on his haunches and leaped forward each time the wolf shook him, and leaping forward each time the wolf shook himself and made a move towards the timber which would save him. From the beginning of this chase, Danilo, hearing the hallooing, had ridden out to the edge of the woods. He saw Karay take the wolf and stopped his horse, supposing the business was over. But when the hunters did not dismount, when the wolf shook himself and began to make off, Danilo set his brown horse not towards the wolf, but in a straight line towards the timber, just as Karay had done to head off the wolf. Thanks to this direction, he rode up to the wolf just as the uncle's dog stopped him the second time. Danilo rode silently, holding an unsheathed dagger in his left hand and threshing the taut flanks of his brown horse with his whip as if it was a flail. Nikolai did not see or hear Danilo until the brown horse, breathing heavily, snorted past him, and he heard the sound of a body falling and saw that Danilo was already lying on the wolf's rump in the midst of the dog, trying to catch him by the ears. It was obvious to the hunters and to the dogs and to the wolf himself that it was all over now. The beast, his ears laid back fearfully, tried to get up, but the dogs clung to him. Danilo, standing up, made a falling step, and with his whole weight, as if lying down to rest, collapsed on the wolf, seizing him by the ears. Nikolai wanted to stab him, but Danilo whispered, "Don't, we'll truss him up." And changing position, he placed his foot on the wolf's neck. They put a stick in the wolf's mouth, tied it with a leash like a bridle, bound his legs, and Danilo rolled the wolf from side to side a couple of times. With happy, exhausted faces, they hoisted the live, seasoned wolf onto a shying, snorting horse, and accompanied by the squealing dogs, took him to the place where they all were supposed to assemble. The hounds had taken 2 young wolves, and the boar's eyes 3. The hunters came together with their quarry and their stores, and everyone went to look at the seasoned old wolf, who, lolling his big browed head with the stick gripped in his mouth, looked with wide, glassy eyes at the whole crowd of dogs and people surrounding him. When touched, he jerked his bound legs and looked at them all wildly and at the same time simply. Count Ilya Andreich also rode up and touched the wolf. "Oh, what a big old seasoned one," he said. "A seasoned one, eh?" he asked Danilo, who was standing next to him. "Yes, a seasoned one, Your Excellency," replied Danilo, hastily doffing his hat. The Count remembered how he had let the wolf slip and his confrontation with Danilo. "You do get angry, though, brother," said the Count. Danilo said nothing and just shyly smiled his childishly meek and pleasant smile. Section 6. The old Count rode home. Natasha and Petchek stayed with the hunt, promising to come at once. The hunt went further on because it was still early. At midday, the hounds were loosed into a ravine overgrown with dense young forest. Nikolai, standing in the stubble, could see all his hunters. Across from Nikolai was a field of winter wheat, and there stood one of his hunters, alone, in a hollow, behind an upthrust hazel brush. As soon as the hounds were loosed into the ravine, Nikolai heard the intermittent bang of a dog he knew, Voltorn. Other dogs joined him, now falling silent, now giving tongue again. A moment later, from the woods came a fox-hunting cry, and the whole pack, joining together, went racing along the edge of the ravine in the direction of the field, away from Nikolai. He saw the whippers in their red hats, riding all along the edge of the overgrown ravine. He even saw the dogs and expected every second that a fox would appear on the other side on the green field. The hunter, who was standing in the hollow, stirred and loosed his dogs, and Nikolai saw a strange, low-slung red fox which, puffing up its tail, raced swiftly across the field. The dogs bore down on it. Now they drew close, now it started dodging around them, circling more and more quickly, and twining its puffed-up, brushed tail around itself. And then someone's white dog flew at it, and after it a black one, and everything became confused, and then the dogs started forming a star, their rumps pointing outwards, swaying slightly. 2 hunters rode up to the dogs. one in a red hat, the other a stranger in a green caftan. What's this, thought Nikolai. Where did that hunter appear from? He's not uncle's. The hunter took the fox from the dogs and stood dismounted for a long time without strapping it on. The horses, their bridles free and their saddles jutting up, stood nearby, and the dogs lay down. The hunters waved their arms and did something with the fox. The sound of a horn rang out from there, the conventional signal of a fight. If it's Illigan's hunter and our Ivan acting up over something, said Nikolai's groom. Oh, it's Illigan's hunter and our Ivan acting up over something, said Nikolai's groom. Nikolai sent his groom to call his sister and Petya to him, and rode at a walk to the place where the kennelmen were gathering the hounds. Several hunters galloped to the scene of the fight. Nikolai dismounted and stood by the hounds with Natasha and Petya, who joined him, waiting for news of how the matter would end. The hunter, who had been fighting, left the edge of the woods with the fox strapped to his saddle and rode over to his young master. He took off his hat while still some distance away and tried to speak respectfully, but he was pale, breathless, and his face was angry. He had a black eye, but he probably did not know it. What was that about? Asked Nikolai. Why, as if he's going to hunt out from under our hounds. It was my mouse gray bitch that caught it. Go on, take it to court. He grabs hold of the fox. I whacked him with it. You want it? It's strapped over here. And how would you like a bit of this? Said the hunter, pointing to his dagger and probably imagining that he was still talking to his enemy. Nikolai, not responding to the hunter, asked his sister and Petya to wait for him and rode to the place where Illigan's hostile hunt stood. The victorious hunter rode into the crowd of hunters there and, surrounded by curious sympathizers, told of his exploit. The thing was that Illigan, with whom the Rostovs had a quarrel and a lawsuit, used to hunt in places that customarily belonged to the Rostovs, and now, as if on purpose, he had sent his men to the reserve where the Rostovs were hunting and had allowed his hunter to take the quarry hunted down by the Rostovs' hounds. Nikolai had never seen Illigan, but as usual, knowing no middle way in his opinions and feelings, judging by the rumors of this landover's violence and willfulness, hated him with all his heart and considered him his bitterest enemy. He was now riding up to him in angry agitation, firmly gripping his whip and fully prepared for the most resolute and dangerous actions against his enemy. He had barely ridden out beyond the projecting arm of the forest when he saw a fat gentleman in a visored beer cap coming towards him on a beautiful black horse, accompanied by 2 grooms. Instead of an enemy, Nikolai found Illigan a respectable, courteous gentleman, especially desirous of making the young count's acquaintance. Riding up to Rostov, Illigan raised his beaver hat and said that he was very much regretted what had happened, and said that he would order the hunter punished for allowing himself to hunt from under another man's dogs, asked to make the count's acquaintance, and offered him his own hunting spots. Natasha, fearing that her brother would do something terrible in his agitation, followed not far behind him. Seeing the enemies greet each other amicably, she rode up to them. Illigan raised his beaver cap still higher before Natasha, and smiling pleasantly, said the countess represented Diana both in her passion for hunting and in her beauty, of which he had heard so much. To smooth over his hunter's offense, Illigan insistently invited Rostov to come to his upland, which was less than a mile away, which he kept for himself, and which, according to him, was all strewn with hares. Nikolai accepted, and the hunt, having doubled in size, moved on. To reach Illigan's upland, they had to go across the fields. The hunters spread out. The gentry rode together. The uncle, Rostov, and Illigan kept glancing at each other's dogs on the sly, trying to keep the others from noticing, and sought wordly among those dogs for rivals to their own. Rostov was especially struck by the beauty of a small, purebred, red-spotted bitch in Illigan's pack, slender but with muscles of steel, narrow pincers, muzzled, and prominent black eyes. He had heard about the swiftness of Illigan's dogs, and in this beautiful bitch saw a rival to his Milka. In the middle of a sedate conversation about that year's harvest, begun by Illigan, Nikolai pointed to his red-spotted bitch. That's a good bitch you've got, he said in a casual tone. Swift-footed? This one? Yes, she's a good dog, a catcher, Illigan said in an indifferent voice of his red-spotted Yurza, for whom he had given his neighbor 3 families of house serfs a year before. Oh my goodness. So with you too, Count, there's no boasting about flour production this year, he continued the conversation. And considering it polite to pay the young count back in kind, Illigan looked over his dogs and picked out Milka, whose broadness struck his eye. "She's a good one, that black-spotted one of yours. Well built," he said. "Yes, she's all right. Good speed," Nikolai replied. "If only there was a seasoned hare running through the field, I'd show you what kind of dog she is," he thought. And turning to his groom, he said he would give a ruble to the hunter who could find a hare in its form. "I don't understand," Illigan went on. "How is it that other hunters can be jealous over game and dogs? I'll tell you about myself, Count. I enjoy having a ride, you know. And you get together with company like this. What could be better?" He again took off his beaver cap to Natasha. "But this counting skins, who brought in how many, it's all the same to me." "Well, yes. Or that I should be upset that another man's dog catches it and not mine. All I want is to admire the chase. Isn't that so, Count? Then, in my opinion." "Halloo!" came the long drawn-out cry of one of the Borzai men who had stopped. He was standing on a low knoll amidst the stubble with his whip raised, and once more called out, "Halloo!" The sound and the raised whip signified that he had spotted a hare in its form in front of him. "Ah, seems he spotted one," Illigan said casually. "Well, let's course it, Count." "Yes, we should ride over together, shall we?" Nikolai replied, looking at Yurza and at his uncle's red Ruge, two rivals with whom he had never yet had his dogs compete. "And what if they pulled my Minka's off its ears?" he thought, heading for the hare alongside his uncle and Illigan. "A seasoned one?" asked Illigan, approaching the hunter who had spotted the hare and turning, not without excitement, to whistle up Yurza. "And you, Mikhail Nikanorich?" He turned to the uncle. The uncle rode along, scowling. "Why should I get into it? You are dogs, right you are. You paid a village for each of them. They cost thousands. You match yours, I'll watch." "Ruge, here," he cried. "Rugeyushka," he added, involuntarily expressing by this diminutive his tenderness and the hope he placed in this red dog. Natasha saw and felt with hidden excitement that these two old men and her brother saw and felt the hidden excitement of these two old men and her brother, and was excited herself. The hunter on the knoll stood with his whip raised. The gentleman rode up to him at a walk. The hounds, running just on the horizon, were turning away from the hare. The rest of the hunters were also riding away. Everything moved slowly, sedately. "Where's his head pointing?" said Nikolai, riding up within 100 paces of the hunter who had spotted the hare. But before the hunter had time to reply, the hare, sensing which way the wind was turning, leaped up from his form. The pack of hounds, linked in pairs, raced baying down the hill after the hare. From all sides of the Borzais, which were not on leashes, rushed after the hounds and the hare. All those slow-moving hunters and whippers in, crying, "Hold up!" throwing off their dogs, and the Borzai men crying, "Sick him!" and driving their dogs on, galloped across the field. The calm Illigan, Nikolai, Natasha, and their uncle flew along, not knowing how or where, seeing only the dogs and the hare, only fearing to lose sight even for a moment of the course of the chase. The hare happened to be seasoned and swift-footed. Jumping up, he did not run at once, but moved his ears, listening to the shouting and stamping that suddenly rose up on all sides. He made some 10 leaps, not quickly, letting the dogs get closer to him, and finally, choosing his direction and realizing the danger, laid his ears back and dashed off as fast as his legs would carry him. He had been lying in the stubble, but ahead of him were green fields where the grass was soggy. The two dogs of the hunter who had spotted the hare, being closest to him, were the first to view and started after the hare, but they were still far from him when Illigan's red-spotted Yurza flew up from behind, got within a dog's length of him, raced on at a terrible speed, aiming at the hare's tail, and thinking she had seized him, went rolling head over heels. The hare arched his back and raced on still more swiftly. Yurza was overtaken from behind by the broad-haunched, black-spotted Milka, who sped quickly towards the hare. "Good girl, Milushka," Nikolai cried triumphantly. It seemed that Milka was about to hit the hare and snatch him up, but she drew level and missed him. The hare leapt aside. Again, the beautiful Yurza was on the hare and hovering right over his tail, as if measuring so as not to miss this time and take him by the haunch. "Yurzinka, dearie!" wailed Illigan in a voice not his own. Yurza did not heed his prayer. At that very moment she was expected to seize the hare, he swerved and flew out to the boundary between the green fields and the stubble. Again, Yurza and Milka, like a team of horses, straightened up and sped after the hare. It was easier for him to run along the boundary, and the dogs could not close in on him so quickly. Rugeyushka, right you are!" a new voice cried just then, and Ruge, the uncle's red hunchback dog, stretched out, then arching his back, caught up with the first pair of dogs, went ahead of them, raced with a terrible selflessness right onto the hare, knocked him from the boundary into the green field, and raced on still more fiercely over the muddy green growth, sinking up to his knees, and one could only see him going rolling head over heels, dirtying his back in the mud, together with the hare. The dogs surrounded him in a star. A moment later, everyone was standing by the crowding dogs. The happy uncle dismounted and took hold of the hare's, dismounted alone and cut off the hare's foot. Shaking the hare to make the blood run down, he looked around uneasily, his eyes darting, not knowing where to put his arms and legs, and spoke, himself not knowing what or to whom. "That's a right good piece of work. There's a dog, outran them all, 1,000 rubles or one. Right you are," he said, gasping and looking around angrily, as if scolding someone, as if they were all his enemies, as if they had all offended him, and he had only now finally managed to vindicate himself. "There's your 1,000 rubles, dog, for you. Right you are." "Catch, Ruge," he said, tossing him the cut-off paw with dirt stuck to it. "You earned it. Right you are." "She's worn out. She ran him down 3 times by herself," Nikolai said, also not listening to anyone and not caring whether anyone was listening to him. "He's cut in," Iligin's groom was saying. "She almost had him, and after that any mongrel could have caught him," Iligin was saying at the same time, red-faced, trying to catch his breath after the galloping and excitement. At the same time, Natasha, without pausing for breath, let out a joyful and rapturous shriek, so shrill that it made their ears ring. With this shriek, she expressed everything the other hunters had expressed with their simultaneous talk, and this shriek was so odd that she herself would have been embarrassed at such wild shrieking, and they all would have been surprised at it if it had happened at any other time. The uncle strapped up the hare, flipped it nimbly and deftly across his horse's croup, as if reproaching them all by this flipping, and mounting his chestnut with such a look as though he did not even want to speak with anyone, rode off. Everyone else but him, sad and offended, rode along, and only after a time could they recover their former sham indifference. For a long time they kept glancing at the red Ruge, who, his haunched back dirty with mud, jingling his collar, trotted behind the uncle's horse legs with the calm look of a conqueror. "So I'm just like all the rest when it's not a matter of the chase. Well, but when it is, watch out," was, as it seemed to Nikolai, what the dog's look said. When, a long time later, the uncle rode up to Nikolai and began speaking to him, Nikolai felt flattered that, after all that had happened, his uncle still condescended to speak to him. Section 7. When Iligin took leave of Nikolai in the evening, Nikolai was so far from home that he accepted his uncle's offer to quit the hunt and spend the night with him, the uncle, in his village of Mikhailovka. "If you come to my place, right you are. That will be even better," said the uncle. "You see, it's wet weather," the uncle said. "You'll get some rest. The little countess will be taken in the droshky." The uncle's offer was accepted. A hunter was sent to Otrudno for the droshky, and Nikolai went to his uncle's with Natasha and Petya. Some 5 men servants, big and small, ran out to the front porch to meet the master. Dozens of women, old, big, and little, stuck themselves out from the back porch to look at the arriving hunters. The presence of Natasha, a woman, a lady on horseback, raised the curiosity of the uncle's people to such a degree of astonishment that many, unabashed by her presence, went up to her, looking into her eyes, and made remarks about her, as if about some wonder on display which was not a human being, and could not hear or understand that they were talking about her. "Arinka, look, she sits sideways. She sits and her skirts hang down. See, there's a little horn. Saints alive, a little knife. See, like a Tartar woman. How is it that you don't go head over heels?" the boldest of them said, addressing Natasha directly. The uncle dismounted by the porch of his small wooden house, sunk in a garden, and looked over his domestics, shouting peremptorily that the superfluous people should take themselves off, and everything necessary should be done to receive the guests and the hunt. They all dispersed. The uncle helped Natasha down from the horse and led her by the arm up the shaky plank steps of the porch. The house, unplastered with timber walls, was not very clean inside. One could see that the aim of those living in it did not consist of keeping it spotless. But there was also no signs of neglect. The entryway smelled of fresh apples and was hung with wolf and fox pelts. The uncle led his guests through the front hall into a small reception room with a folding table and red chairs, then to a drawing room with a round birch table and a sofa, and then to a study with a torn sofa, a worn rug, and portraits of Suvorov, the host's father and mother, and himself in military uniform. The study smelled strongly of tobacco and dogs. In the study, the uncle asked his guests to sit down and make themselves at home, and he himself left. Ruge, with his still dirty back, came into the study and lay on the sofa, cleaning himself with his tongue and teeth. From the study led a corridor in which one could see screens with torn curtains. From behind the screens came women's laughter and whispering. Natasha, Nikolai, and Petya took off their coats and sat down on the sofa. Petya leaned on his arm and immediately fell asleep. Natasha and Nikolai sat silently. Their faces were burning, they were very hungry and very merry. They looked at each other. After the hunt, inside the house, Nikolai no longer considered it necessary to display his male superiority before his sister. Natasha winked at her brother. The two restrained themselves for a time, then burst into ringing laughter before they managed to think up a pretext for their laughter. A little later, the uncle came in wearing a jerkin, dark blue trousers, and low boots. Natasha felt that this same costume, in which she had looked upon her uncle with astonishment and mockery at Otrino, was a genuine costume, in no way worse than frock coats and tailcoats. The uncle was also merry. Not only was he not offended by the laughter of the brother and sister, it would not have entered his head that they might laugh at his way of life, but he joined in their causeless laughter himself. "That's the young countess, right you are. I've never seen another like her," he said, handing a pipe with a long chibuk to Rostov, and with a habitual gesture, tucking another, its chibuk cut short between 3 fingers. "She's ridden all day, enough for a man, and it seems like nothing to her." Soon after the uncle, the door was opened by a girl, evidently barefoot by the sound of her feet, and through it came a fat, red-cheeked, beautiful woman of about 40, with a double chin and full red lips, carrying a big, heavily laden tray. She looked around at the guests with hospitable dignity and affability in her eyes and in her every movement, and with an amiable smile bowed respectfully to them. Despite her more than usual stoutness, which made her thrust her chest and stomach forward and hold her head back, this woman, the uncle's housekeeper, had an extremely light step. She went to the table and set down the tray, and with her plump white hands deftly took the bottles, snacks, treats, and arranged them on the table. Having finished that, she stepped away, and with a smile on her face, stood by the door. "Here I am. Now do you understand your uncle?" her appearance seemed to say to Rostov. How could he not understand? Not only Rostov, but Natasha as well understood the uncle and the meaning of the frowning brows and happy, self-contented smile that puckered his lips slightly the moment Anisya Fyodorovna came in. On the tray were an herb cordial, liqueurs, mushrooms, flat cakes made from dark flour and buttermilk, honey in the comb, still and foaming mead, apples, fresh and roasted nuts, and nuts in honey. This Anisya Fyodorovna brought preserves made with honey and with sugar, and a ham and a just roasted chicken. All this was tended, gathered, and cooked by Anisya Fyodorovna. All this smelled and spoke and had the taste of Anisya Fyodorovna. It all spoke of juiciness, cleanness, whiteness, and a pleasant smile. "Have some, little Miss Countess," she repeated, serving Natasha one thing, then another. Natasha ate everything, and it seemed to her that she had never seen or tasted anywhere such buttermilk flat cakes, preserves so fragrant, such nuts and honey, or such a chicken. Anisya Fyodorovna left. Rostov and the uncle, washing their dinner down with cherry liqueur, spoke of past and future hunts, of Ruge and of Iligan's dogs. Natasha, her eyes shining, sat straight-backed on the sofa listening to them. She tried several times to wake up Petya and give him something to eat, but he mumbled incomprehensibly, evidently without waking up. Natasha was in such merry spirits, she felt so good in these new surroundings that she only feared the droshky would come for her too soon. After a chance moment of silence, as almost always happens when people who receive acquaintances in their home for the first time, the uncle said, answering a thought that was in his guests' minds, "So this is the life that this is not how I live out my life. I'll die, right you are. There'll be nothing left, no use sinning." The uncle's face was significant and even handsome as he said it. Rostov involuntarily remembered all the good things he had heard from his father and the neighbors about his uncle. In this whole part of the province, his uncle had the reputation of a most noble and disinterested eccentric. He was called in to judge family matters. He was asked to be an executor. Secrets were entrusted to him. He was elected to judgeship and to other posts, but he always stubbornly refused social service, spending the fall and winter in the fields, riding his chestnut gelding, sitting at home in the winter, lying in his overgrown garden in the summer. How is it that you don't serve, Uncle? I did, but I quit. Unfit for it. Right you are. I don't understand a thing. It's your sort of business. I don't have brains enough. As for hunting, that's another matter. It's right. You are. Open the door there, he shouted. Why did you close it? The door at the end of the corridor, which the uncle called a corridor. The door at the end of the corridor. The uncle called it a corridor. Led to the bachelor's hunter's room, as the hunter's common room was known. Bare feet quickly pattered off, and an invisible hand opened the door to the hunter's room. From the corridor, the sounds of a balalaika became clearly audible, played by someone who was obviously a master at it. Natasha had long been listening to these sounds, and now went to the corridor to hear them better. That's my Mitka, the coachman. I bought him a good balalaika. I like it, said the uncle. It was the uncle's custom that, when he came back from the hunt, Mitka would play the balalaika in the bachelor's hunter's rooms. The uncle liked listening to the music. How good! Excellent, really, said Nikolai with a sort of involuntary disdain, as if he was ashamed to confess that he found the sounds very pleasing. What do you mean, excellent? Natasha said with reproach, feeling the tone with which her brother had said it. It's not excellent, it's simply lovely. Just as the uncle's mushrooms, honey, and liqueurs seemed the best in the world to her, so this song, too, seemed to her at that moment the height of musical loveliness. More, please, more, Natasha said through the door as soon as the balalaika fell silent. Mitka tuned up and began picking out Barinya, and with runs and leaps. The uncle sat and listened, his head inclined to one side with a barely perceptible smile. The melody of Barinya was repeated some 100 times. The balalaika was tuned several times, and again the same sounds rippled out, and the listeners were not bored, and only wanted to hear this playing again and again. Anisia Fyodorovna came in and leaned her corpulent body against the doorpost. Listen, if you please, little countess, she said to Natasha with a smile, very much like the uncle's smile. He plays nicely, she said. This part here he doesn't do right, the uncle said suddenly with an energetic gesture. You should pour it on. Right you are, pour it on. How can you do it? Natasha asked. The uncle smiled without answering. Go, Anisyushka, see whether my guitar has all its strings or not. Haven't set hand to it for a long time. Right you are, gave it up. Anisia Fyodorovna went eagerly with her light step to fulfill her master's request and fetched the guitar. The uncle, not looking at anyone, blew the dust off and rapped on the face of the guitar with his bony fingers, tuned it up, and settled comfortably in his armchair. He took hold of the guitar with a slightly theatrical gesture, cocking his left elbow a little higher on the neck, and with a wink at Anisia Fyodorovna, did not begin Barinya, but struck one sonorous, pure chord with measuredly, calmly, but firmly began at a very slow tempo to pick out the well-known song, Down the Roadway. At once, in time with the somber merriment, the same that was breathed out by Anisia Fyodorovna's whole being, the tune of the song began to sing in the souls of Nikolai and Natasha. Anisia Fyodorovna blushed and, covering her face with her handkerchief, left the room laughing. The uncle continued to pick out the song clearly, assiduously, and with energetic firmness, gazing with an altered, inspired gaze at the place where Anisia Fyodorovna had left. Something laughed slightly in his face, on one side, under his grey moustache, and it laughed especially when, as the song got going, the tempo quickened, and in running passages, there would be a sudden break. Lovely, lovely, uncle, more, more, cried Natasha as soon as he finished. She jumped up from her place and embraced her uncle and kissed him. Nikolenka, Nikolenka, she said, glancing at her brother as if asking him, what on earth is it? Nikolai also liked the uncle's playing very much. The uncle played the song a second time. Anisia Fyodorovna's smiling face again appeared at the doorway, and behind her some other faces. Fetching water, clear and cold, he cries out, O maiden, hold. The uncle played again, made a skillful run, broke off, and twitched his shoulders. Come, come, dearest uncle, Natasha motioned in such an imploring voice as though her life depended on it. The uncle got up, and it was as if they were two men in him. One smiled gravely at the jolly fellow, while the jolly fellow performed a naive and precise little caper before dancing. "Come, niece," cried the uncle, waving to Natasha with the hand that had broken off the cord. Natasha threw off the kerchief she had wrapped around her, ran and placed herself in front of her uncle, and arms akimbo made a movement with her shoulders and stopped. Where, how, and when this little countess, brought up by an émigrée Frenchwoman, sucked this spirit in from the Russian air she breathed, where had she gotten these ways, which should have been long supplanted by the pas de cheval? Yet the spirit and these ways were those very inimitable, unstudied Russian ones which the uncle expected of her. As soon as she stood there, smiling triumphantly, proudly, and with sly merriment, the fear which had first seized Nikolai and all those present, that she would not do it right, went away, and they began to admire her. She did it exactly right, and so precisely, and so perfectly precisely, that Anisya Fyodorovna, who at once handed Natasha the kerchief she needed for it, wept through her laughter, looking at this slender, graceful countess, brought up in silk and velvet, so foreign to her, who was able to understand everything that was in Anisya and in Anisya's father, and in her aunt, and in her mother, and in every Russian. "Well, little countess, right you are," the uncle said, laughing joyfully, finishing the dance. "What a niece! Now all we need is to choose for you a fine young fellow for a husband. Right you are." "He's already been chosen," said Nikolai, smiling. "Oh?" the uncle said with surprise, looking questioningly at Natasha. Natasha, with a happy smile, nodded affirmatively. "And such a one," she said. But as soon as she said it, another new train of thoughts and feelings arose in her. What did Nikolai's smile mean when he said he's already been chosen? Is he glad of it or not? He seems to be thinking that my Bolkonsky wouldn't approve of, wouldn't understand this joy of ours. No, he'd understand everything. Where is he now? Thought Natasha, and her face suddenly became serious. But that lasted only a second. "Don't dare think of it," she said to herself, and smiling sat down again beside her uncle, asking him to play something else. The uncle played another song, then a waltz. Then after a pause he cleared his throat and struck up his favorite hunting song. "Late that evening in the wood, it was snowing, well and good." The uncle sang as the folk sing, with the full and naive conviction the whole meaning of the song is contained in the words alone, that the tune comes of itself, and that the tune does not exist on its own, but only just so, for the sake of the rhythm. Which was why this unconscious tune of the uncle's, as in the Song of Birds, was so extraordinarily good. Natasha was delighted with the uncle's singing. She decided that she would no longer study the harp, but only play the guitar. She took the uncle's guitar and at once found the chords for the song. Sometime past nine a break, a droshky and 3 mounted men came looking for Natasha and Petya. The count and countess did not know where they were and were very worried, as the messenger said. Petya was carried out and laid like a dead body in the break. Natasha and Nikolai got into the droshky. The uncle wrapped Natasha up and said goodbye to her with a completely new tenderness. He went with them on foot to the bridge, which they had to wade around, and ordered the hunters to ride in front with lanterns. "Goodbye, dear niece," his voice cried out in the darkness, not the voice Natasha used to know, but the one that had sung late that evening in the wood. In the village they rode through there were little red lights and a cheerful smell of smoke. "How lovely this uncle is," said Natasha when they came out on the high road. "Yes," said Nikolai. "Are you cold?" "No, I'm perfect. I feel so good," Natasha said, even with perplexity. They were silent for a long time. The night was dark and damp. The horses could not be seen. They only heard them splashing through the unseen mud. What was going on in that childishly receptive soul, so greedily grasping and absorbing all the diverse impressions of life? How did it all get laid away in her? But she was very happy. They drove up to the house. She began to sing the tune of the song, Late That Evening in the Wood, the melody she had been trying to get all the while they rode, and finally did get. "Got it?" asked Nikolai. "What are you thinking about now?" Nikolenka asked Natasha. They liked asking each other that. "Me?" said Nikolai, trying to recall. "You see, first I was thinking that Ruge, the red dog, resembles Uncle, that if he were a man, he would always keep Uncle with him. If not for the chase, then for his tunefulness. How tuneful Uncle is, isn't it so? Well, and you? Me? Wait, yes. At first I was thinking, here we are driving along and think we're driving home, but God knows where we're going in this darkness, and suddenly we'll arrive and see we're not in Notre Dame, but in a magic kingdom. And then I was thinking, no, nothing else. I know you must have been thinking about him, said Nikolai, smiling as Natasha could tell from the sound of his voice. No, said Natasha, though in fact she had been thinking at the same time about Prince Andrei and how he would have liked their uncle. And I've also been repeating, all the way I've been repeating, how well Aniushka stepped out. How well, said Natasha, and Nikolai heard her ringing, causeless, happy laughter. You know, she suddenly said, I'll never be as happy and peaceful as I am now. That's nonsense, silliness, rubbish, said Nikolai, and thought, how lovely my Natasha is. I have no other friend like her and never will. Why is she getting married? We could keep driving around together. How lovely my Nikolai is, thought Natasha. Ah, there's still light in the drawing room, she said, pointing out to the window of the house, shining beautifully in the wet, velvet darkness of the night. And that is where we shall stop it for now. And that is the end of section 7. Interesting how much detail Tolstoy takes, how much time and detail he takes in these other like background stories like The Hunt, which is an extensive part. But it's just it's also really charming to see their interactions and, the different characters and character of the different persons in the story. It's quite lovely. Nikolai's a little bit of a young punk, but he's, still young. And Natasha's just hilarious because she feels like all impulse. There's something else I was thinking of. Oh yeah, and I'm wondering if there's something between the old count and his housekeeper. I was like, ooh, that's a thing. Or if it's just they've just been together for so long, her taking care of his place. Anyways, quite lovely. Thank you for tuning in. Like I said, be back here tomorrow at 3. And then from Thursday on, you can listen anytime, but it'll definitely have readings up by 3. We're making progress, my friends. We're nearly halfway there. If we put on a little steam, we might be halfway there in a week or 2. All right. I hope you have a great week. Remember, there's always links in the description of the video for things you can do to stay active for social justice, for racial equality in America. Hope you guys are staying safe and healthy and also staying positive and doing good. Have a great day. Stay safe. Stay loving. Bye.